Hello and the warmest of welcomes to this a brand new episode of Rambling Reviews. I'm your humble host Miles Mason, and in today's discussion we're going to be talking about one of the most important albums of all time, Exodus by the leader and luminary Bob Marley. Now this is an album I've discussed previously on this channel, but because there's so much to talk about here, I suppose it's time for the first episode of Rambling Reviews Revisited. So today I'm going to be diving into the inspiration, motivation and the composition of this incredible album to explore why it's so important to so many out there. So without further ado, let's get straight into the review. Bob Marley and the Wailers were easily one of the most influential groups of all time, celebrated for their incredible contribution to not only music and culture, but to the collective wisdom of the world and to the spirituality of many. This collective of phenomenal musicians who came out of Kingston, Jamaica, started their musical career performing the sounds of their culture known as reggae music. Eventually they were picked up and became friends with legendary reggae artists and producers including Lee Perry and Leslie Kong, who with the help of their respective studio bands, produced and promoted a number of projects for this group, including the album entitled The Best of the Wailers. Now, over time, the original lineup changed, with the founding members Pete Tosh and Neville Livingston leaving the outfit over their personal reservations regarding the venues the bands were playing, calling them freak clubs. Now, this shift would result in a formation of a new lineup called the Wailers Band that consisted of the brothers Carlton and Aston Family Man Barrett holding down the rhythm section respectively, as well as Junior Marvin and Al Anderson playing the lead guitars, and Tyrone Downey and Earl Linder playing keys, and Alderson Patterson playing percussion. And let's not forget the Freebird backup singers, made up of Bob Marley's wife Rita Marley, as well as Jude Moat and Marcia Griffin. Now with this new lineup and a new focus, Bob set to write in this remarkable album, a project that contains some of the most loved songs of all time, and a message that is as important now as it was back then. The message that I'm referring to here is a primary inspiration of this project, and can be found right there in the title, Exodus, a term that is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a mass departure of people, and a word with a very storied and significant spiritual path. And before I continue, I just want to outline that this album has an incredibly woven spiritual and religious context, and that if you're not religious or spiritual for that matter, it doesn't mean that there's not a tremendous amount of wisdom and beauty to be found here for you to interpret in your own way. So that aside, the book of Exodus is the second book of the Hebrew Bible that tells the story of the Israelites, Yahweh's chosen people's escape from Egyptian slavery thanks to the guidance of the prophet Moses. To the Rastafarian religion, this term has been appropriated to refer to the story of the Ethiopians who were enslaved by the British and moved to the Caribbean island we now know as Jamaica. Now, the Rastafarian prophet Haile Selassie, who was at the time the emperor of Ethiopia, applied this term to inspire a movement of Jah or Jehovah's peoples back to their motherland, Africa, and away from the Babylon, which is a reference to the book of Revelations that refers to a place of evil. In the Rastafarian context, this refers to the West. For example, in the title track, Exodus, Bob sings that we're leaving Babylon and we're going to our father's land. And this idea of the father's land is found throughout this album, and again is in reference to Africa, the root of humanity, as well as to a reference to the idea of returning to heaven on earth, in other words, the father's land. And this is why I find this reference so interesting and inspiring, because it can be used as a powerful metaphor for returning to not only some physical motherland, but returning to a spiritual motherland, a spiritual clarity, or just to the nature of humanity. And this is a story that is basically universally applicable and can be easily applied to the nature of today's society, a society that has lost connection with our true nature. In terms of the motivation of this incredible project, Bob Marley and the Wailers clearly wanted to make an amazing sounding album, and they did just that. But beyond that, they wanted to help inspire a generation and help raise the collective consciousness by guiding people back to the lights of their lives and back to the true nature of humanity, which is of course love. And this message can be seen with the very first song and one of my favourite songs from the project, Natural Mystic, that explores the idea that the truths of the world are emitting from the depths of nature. If you listen carefully, you will now hear. And I feel it's a message that is super important to talk about today because we have become, particularly in the West, so disconnected from nature, something that we were once a real big part of until we were cast from the Garden of Eden and cast from our natural roots. In this song, Bob is suggesting that we must no longer hide behind the lies of our oppressors and face our current reality in order to return to humanity's true nature, which is a connection that most people today would struggle to understand, and is that of the universal consciousness. Another really important point to mention here is that on this album, Bob is attempting to motivate the listeners to find the power to change the world that lies within all men and women, encouraging fallen fighters to take their stance again and fight against the oppression of a corrupt political establishment that seeks to control and suppress our true nature. For example, on the second song, So Much Things to Say, Bob is encouraging the listeners to fight for their spiritual right and not to be deceived by the powers that seek to control and manipulate us. And he actually makes reference to a really important quote from Ephesians 6:12, the full quote being, "Put on the full armour of God so that you can take a stance against the devil's schemes. For the struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, and against the powers of the worlds of darkness, and against the spiritual forces of the evil of the heavenly realms." And my interpretation of this quote, and Bob's application of it, is that we're not fighting each other, but our battle is against the spiritual forces that guide humanity. He's encouraging the listeners to first overcome the battle within by putting on the armour of faith. And again, you can view this through a religious lens, or you can just see this as a profound piece of wisdom that can be applied to your life on your terms, simply by finding faith within yourself to overcome the battle within. When it comes to the composition of this album, there's a fantastic significance to the order and the structure it follows, and how the music works alongside the message, supporting it perfectly. And now I'm just going to briefly touch on each track and talk about how each song works to contribute to the overall message of this album. Starting out with Natural Mystic, a song that opens up this album perfectly, both in terms of the musicality that's helped define people's perception of reggae music. It also establishes the call to return to our roots. That is the core theme of this album. Next is So Much Things to Say, that again explores the first footsteps of returning to your core self, which starts by shredding the barriers your ego has manifested to keep itself safe from the world. Only by letting down these false barriers can you allow the light to get in and for your light to shine out. So simply let go of what you believe others might have to say about you, and the real you will shine through. The third song, Guiltiness, confronts people's guilty actions and how they will never go unchecked. Because if you've done something wrong, even if you didn't get punished for it, it will rest on your consciousness, manifesting a unhappy reality. Whereas loving actions in life will manifest a positive perception. And this is a concept that can be linked to the idea of karma. It's not just a spiritual law, it's a metaphysical law, based on how your thoughts, feelings and actions establish the nature of your individual reality. Next up is The Heathens, which again links back to the idea of karma, and that when the God of love returns, his light will destroy the sinners and the sin, which is the meaning of the main hook of the song. The heathens back they ponder wall, or the heathens' backs are against the wall. We've nowhere to hide. And then we have the title track, Exodus, that again is about calling people to action, inspiring people to fight for their rights and to return to their spiritual motherland. After this call to return, we get one of the most joyous songs on the album, Jammin', a song that, through its infectious melody, encourages people to celebrate their lives and to be happy. Jammin' is basically a reference to that. We're jamming, and I hope you like jamming too. And I feel this is a really beautiful and well-placed song in the album, as it comes post-Exodus, and sings of a joy that can be found within you when you're willing to accept it. After this comes two of what I honestly consider to be the most romantic songs of all time. Waiting in Vain, a beautiful song about Bob's wait for love in the form of Damian Marley's mother, Cindy Shakespeare, but this can also be a metaphor for, again, God. And then there's Turn Your Lights Down Low, the sublimely serene song that's about the love two can find within each other's embrace. And we're almost there, guys, so the second to last song on the album, and one that I'm all too sure you're familiar with, is Three Little Birds. A universally loved song that teaches us that while hardship is an unavoidable element of life, as we do live in a dualistic universe, it's not about the hardship we face, but how we face it, and how we internalize it, in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way. As there are two ultimate perspectives, pessimism and positivity, dark and light if you will, and we have the choice of the perspective we choose to perceive these things through. Also, something I'd like to mention is just how the Three Little Birds line could be possibly a reference to the Holy Trinity, or maybe just a reference to the three backup singers who sing really sweetly on this song. And the final song, and the absolutely perfect way to bring this album to a close, is One Love, People Get Ready. Another song that I'm sure you might have come across before, and is one that has had a monumental impact on humankind. A song that brings this album to its point of singularity, as through this album, he's basically guiding us through the stages of spiritual awakening. Literally, giving people a guide to spiritual enlightenment by encouraging us to listen to the calls of nature, to punish evil, to let go of fear, and relinquish pessimism in pursuit of positivity. Leading us to one love, a reflection of the singularity of reality, and the oneness of the external universe as well as the internal universe. And so that's going to have to do it for this week's episode of Rambling Reviews Revisited. And as always, it was such a pleasure for me today to talk to you guys about this amazing album. I know that it was more of a Bible study than an album review, but I just think with albums like this, it's incredibly important to try and see through the eyes of the artist and find out what inspired them to make these incredibly important pieces. And to me, this is such an incredibly important piece. As I mentioned earlier, it just has such an incredibly tangible amount of wisdom and guidance to be found within this record. You just have to listen to it with an open mind and an open heart. But now I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this album. Tell me about your story with this project and what it means to you down in the comments box below. And as with each episode, I have my recommended listening Spotify playlist linked down in the description. Basically, it's just a collection of some of Bob's other works, as well as some other songs that help expand upon the conversation of this album. So if you haven't, go and check that down in the description below. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. It means more than you know. The support of this channel is just really, really important to me because I love doing these projects. It means the world to me to be able to talk about the music I love, and I'm able to do that with your guys' support. So thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next episode of Rambling Reviews.